I've got a 23-year-old daughter. She's got 2 babies, 3 and 1. We have been trying to get a hold of her all day long, me and the friends. One of her girlfriends just went over to where she lives, and she said the TV's on, the baby's bottle is on the bed full, and little Selena's pacifier is laying on the ground. I was wondering, can I get you guys to go over there? It's a little gray house.
Soon after this 911 call was placed, officers from the Sandusky Police Department were sent to conduct a welfare check on 23-year-old Heather Jackson and her 2 young children, 3-year-old Selena and 1-year-old Wayne Jr. The officers tried knocking on the door, but got no response. They walked around to the back of the house and tried knocking on the back door, but still didn't get a response. With no signs of forced entry, they had no right to break into the house and had no choice but to leave. However, just minutes after they left, 911 operators would receive a second, more serious call.
My name is Daniel Reisner. We was just at a friend, her name's Heather.
We just checked on her not that long ago.
Okay, I walked in the back door because I thought I heard someone come in, and there's a body under the mattress.
And there's a what?
A body, a person's body, a deceased person.
Police immediately rushed back to the house and were met with 2 men standing outside. When the men said that they found a dead body inside, the officers drew their weapons and gained entry into the home. In one of the bedrooms, they found the deceased body of a woman stuffed underneath the mattress. She was completely naked and had a red t-shirt wrapped tightly around her neck, but there were no signs of her 2 children.
She's under the mattress. I don't know where the baby's at. I don't want to start my baby. There's no one else under there. I can't. I lifted it up. I don't see anybody on the other side. Where the f*** the baby?
The officers decided to back out and secure the crime scene, hoping that the children were staying with friends or relatives. But on their way out of the house, they spotted a door that they hadn't noticed on their way in. As they carefully walked inside, they made a gruesome discovery. Right in front of them was the body of the 1-year-old boy, and piled on top of him was his 3-year-old sister. They were both clearly deceased. The crime scene unit was sent in to process the house, while homicide detectives were called in to begin investigating. They learned that their first victim, 23-year-old Heather, had recently divorced her husband Wayne and had just moved into the house days prior. Heather and her husband were high school sweethearts and married young. But after having 2 kids together, they had to take on the roles and responsibilities of parents, and it put a lot of stress on their relationship. Heather's friends and family describe her as a wonderful mother who loved and cared for her kids. As a newly single mother with 2 young children, Heather had her hands full, and her family and friends would help her out from time to time. Every now and then, her best friend Danielle would take the kids to sleep over at her house to allow Heather some time to herself. She had agreed to take the kids that Saturday, but when she arrived to pick them up, nobody answered the door. Danielle went around the house to try the back door and spotted something that instantly made her worry. It was 3-year-old Selena's pacifier. Danielle knew that Selena never went anywhere without it, and she immediately called Heather's mother, who then called 911. As detectives surveyed the area surrounding the crime scene, they spotted their first lead. Right across the street from Heather's house was a hospital parking lot, which had cameras installed outside. Just hours after the bodies were discovered, police were able to access the footage and started playing it from the day before. In the far right corner, Heather's house is just barely visible, but detectives are hopeful that they'll see something. At the crime scene, an officer said that he saw Heather playing with her kids outside of the house while he was out on patrol at 8:30 the night before. They start playing the footage, and at exactly 8:30 p.m., the patrol car can be seen passing by Heather's house. Since they know that Heather and her kids were alive at the time, whoever killed them probably arrived at her house afterward. Detectives continue playing the footage, looking for any movement, but nothing happens until 10:57 p.m. It's barely visible, but a car pulls right up in front of Heather's house. someone exits the house and walks up to the vehicle. Seconds later, the car backs up and pulls into the driveway, and then the headlights go off. But the footage is too grainy to tell whether or not this person entered the house. As detectives continue watching the footage, it started to rain, making the video even more difficult to view. At exactly 11:08 p.m., the car's headlights switch back on. The vehicle backs out of the driveway and heads down the street. It's impossible to make out what make, model, or even the color the vehicle is. The rain gets even heavier, making it impossible to see anything else. The preliminary autopsy results are in, and they confirm what police had suspected. Heather and her children were all strangled to death. Whoever had done this spent 5 to 10 minutes strangling each of the 3 victims until they went completely limp. Police are now on the hunt for a savage, cold-blooded killer, and they need to find him as soon as possible. They start with the people who were last known to be at the house. They bring in the 2 men who found Heather's body, Daniel Reisner and Tom Hansen. The first person they speak to is Daniel Reisner, the man who placed the second 911 call. Daniel says he's never met Heather or her kids, and just happened to be with his friend Tom that morning when he decided to check up on them.
So I went to the back door, opened the screen door, and out the door.
You didn't have to push the door?
You didn't bust nothing.
Okay.
Like I didn't kick the door in or anything.
Okay, but it was definitely unlocked?
Yes.
And you unlocked it?
Okay.
This is the first red flag. Daniel says that the back door was left unlocked, which contradicts accounts of the officers who arrived at the house before he did. They said that it was locked.
If you guys force the door, and that's fine.
Okay, I shook it and it came open.
That's important.
But I didn't physically bust it or
There's no signs of forced entry.
Right.
Okay.
He admits that he forced it open and is asked to submit a DNA sample.
Being that you were in the house, I'm going to ask if I can get a
Yes, I have no problem with anything of that nature.
Daniel agrees, and a sample is collected. Police then bring in the next witness, Tom Hansen, to get his side of the story.
She called me last night and I stopped over there.
Did you get out of the car and go in?
No, I was sitting in the car. She came up to the car and like I said, she hugged me. So thanks.
He tells officers that he went over to Heather's house at around 11 p.m. the night before and noticed another man who was already there.
Then, Josh, I guess his last name was, starts with a C. I talked to Heather for a minute and I said, well, I'm going to get going. She said, all right, she gave me a hug.
Tom says that was the last time he heard from Heather. When she didn't respond to his calls the next morning, he says that he brought Daniel with him to check up on her, and that's when they made the discovery. Tom and Daniel's story is plausible, but it's not uncommon for criminals to return to the crime scene to make it appear like they have nothing to do with it. Tom also agrees to provide a DNA sample, but they both remain on the suspect list for now. Detectives shift their focus to the man who Tom says was still at Heather's house when he left. He's now the last known person to have seen Heather alive. Detectives track down Josh and bring him in for questioning.
Josh, I'm Detective Richmond. Kind of a mess right now, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
How do you know Heather?
Friend. Known her for a couple of years.
Josh says that he and Heather have been friends for a while, and he admits to being at her house the night before.
Who's all there?
Just Heather and her kids. The kids were sleeping.
Okay.
But there was also a guy named Tom there. He came there and then she went outside.
And then he left again?
Yeah, he left. And then
Josh says that at some point he left the house and walked to a nearby 7-Eleven.
And what'd you buy?
a thing of donuts for the kids for breakfast.
Okay, and this was 7-Eleven?
Yes.
Shortly after arriving back at Heather's house, he says his cousin picked him up and drove him home.
She had texted him at 12:49.
Okay.
And that's when he came and got me. 7.
When pressed for more details about that night, Josh says he was intoxicated and doesn't remember much else.
Well, you thought about her, was she drinking too?
No.
Okay.
Josh agrees to provide his DNA sample. While waiting to see if any of them match the crime scene, detectives decide to head over to the 7-Eleven that Josh said he went to. They play back the footage from the night prior and Josh is eventually spotted. At least that part of his story checks out. Back at the police station, the DNA results came in. Daniel Reisner and Tom Hansen's DNA were not found at the scene, and they were both ruled out as suspects. But there were, however, 2 other DNA profiles that were found. One of them belonged to Josh, and the other belonged to an unidentified male. None of the witnesses mentioned seeing a 4th person at the house, and police need to track him down as soon as possible. They obtain Heather's phone records and go through it, looking for clues. They discover that Heather was active on her phone all night, sending and receiving calls and texts the whole time. But at exactly 3:12 a.m., she answered her last phone call, which lasted for 30 seconds. This would be the last time she communicated with anyone. Detectives believe that this must have been when the murders took place. They go back to the hospital surveillance footage and start playing it just past 3 a.m. Sure enough, a car pulls up to the house and backs into the driveway before the headlights go off at exactly 3:12 a.m. The car stays there and doesn't leave until 4:16, over an hour after it pulled in. This leaves plenty of time to commit the murders, and it fits what the phone records show. It's still impossible to make out any details on the car, but police tracked down another camera installed along the route the car seemed to take. When detectives went through the footage, they found their biggest lead yet. The license plate number wasn't visible, but the car was positively identified as a white Cadillac sedan. They now needed to find out who was driving this car that night. Investigators traced the last number Heather answered on her phone, and it came back registered to an individual by the name of Curtis Clinton. Curtis was a convicted felon and had just been released from prison not too long ago. In 1998, he was convicted of sexually assaulting a minor, and just a few months after that, he strangled an 18-year-old girl to death, just 50 miles from where Heather lived. Curtis took a plea deal for the murder and pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter in exchange for a 13-year prison sentence. He was released on parole in February of 2012, just a few months before Heather and her kids were found strangled to death. Curtis also happened to be a suspect in an unrelated rape of a 17-year-old girl that happened just days before the murders. Clearly, he had no business being out on the streets. Detectives checked to see if any vehicles were registered to Curtis Clinton, and lo and behold, they found that he owns a white Cadillac sedan. Police officers headed straight to the last address known to belong to Curtis, but they couldn't find him nor his Cadillac anywhere. They put out a bolo, and it wasn't long before someone spotted something. The white Cadillac belonging to Curtis was found abandoned, just 15 miles away from his home. Officers thoroughly searched it and found a receipt from a nearby gas station. They wasted no time and headed straight there to see if anything was caught on surveillance. "18 hours after killing Heather and her 2 toddlers, Curtis pulls into the gas station in his white Cadillac, then casually walks into the store and purchases a case of beer and some water. Police now have more than enough evidence to put Curtis behind bars, but they had no idea where he was or where he was headed to until a 911 call was placed.
911? Yeah, I don't know if I'm supposed to call you guys. I don't know who I called, but I need help. What kind of help? Do you need an ambulance or law enforcement? An ambulance? My boyfriend, he ended up overdosing on Tylenol. Okay, I'm sending the squad over there.
The name of the patient was Curtis Clinton. As soon as police got wind of this, they headed straight to the emergency room. Curtis was arrested in his hospital gown and was brought in for questioning.
Curtis, did something happen at the house?
Ain't nothing happened at the house. Nothing.
Curtis, you're the last one that was in there. Curtis, do you realize that that house is all on video from Firelands Hospital? Firelands security cameras are right there around that place. Something happened there, Curtis.
Something happened, I don't remember it.
Curtis refuses to talk, but he was not free to go. He was booked and held in custody. While waiting to see a judge, he placed a call to his mother from jail, which was recorded.
I just didn't think that, nothing would happen like that again, so I was doing good. That's okay. Like to start, I could fight through it. So that after 13 years, I'd be over that.
Would you do something for me?
Right.
Stay in prayer, man.
Curtis never admitted to his crimes, but based on the evidence, police reconstructed the events leading up to the murders. The extent of Heather's relationship with Curtis isn't fully known, but they obviously knew each other. They likely became acquainted not too long after Curtis was released on parole earlier that year. Curtis likely showed up uninvited at Heather's house at 3 a.m. that night and was welcomed inside. Detectives believe that at some point he made sexual advances toward Heather, but was turned down, and that's when he flipped. He strangled Heather to death and then stuffed her body under a mattress. He then made his way to her children's room, where he sexually assaulted 3-year-old Selena and then strangled her and her 1-year-old brother to death.
Heather by red shorts and gray lace, fashioned as a ligature. Selena, black knit leggings. And little Wayne, pink fleece bag blanket. Those were the weapons of choice.
The autopsy shows 3-year-old Selena was also sexually assaulted.
Seminal fluid, the DNA that matched the defendant's profile.
Curtis pleaded not guilty to all charges and took his case to trial. He was ultimately convicted by a jury on all charges and was handed 3 death sentences. Curtis Clinton is currently sitting on death row, exhausting his appeals.